When I first started my job in the city of Chattanooga in 2013 as the director of transportation, I had an opportunity to do a survey of sidewalks with some colleagues. There were some places that needed to be repaired, and sidewalks was part of our purview along with the Parks Department. We walked into Coolidge Park, and if you've ever been to Coolidge Park on a hot summer day, you know what it sounds like. Before you can even see it, you can hear it. And as we rounded the corner, we see the Coolidge Park fountain in its full glory. Kids running in all directions, dancing with their hands in the air, bent over, allowing the water to spray into their bodies. The sound was pure glee, and it was contagious. I was with a group of colleagues as we walked away from the park. One of my colleagues, who was one of the ones who was responsible for the pumps and all the plumbing that went into the fountain, muttered under his breath, "This park would be a lot easier to maintain if it wasn't for all these people." I'd like to clarify, because I recently worked in parks, that this individual has not worked for the city of Chattanooga in many years. But I'd also like to give him a little bit of grace, because even I, and I think all of us, have been guilty from time to time of not seeing the full picture. I'm Blythe Bailey. I'm an architect and urban designer. I spent 42 years of my life in Chattanooga. I spent the last 2.5 months as the director of transportation for the city of Boulder. Before that, I worked in similar roles in the city of Chattanooga, running the city's transportation department and working in the parks department. I also had some time working as an architect in private practice, and early in my career, with my math major, I was a high school algebra teacher. In my design practice, I have focused most of my work more on the spaces between buildings than the buildings themselves. Urban designers call those spaces the public realm. And the public realm is basically everything that's outside. It's the open spaces, it's the parks, it's the greenways, it's the streets, it's places even like this that are civic or publicly oriented. I believe for those of us that live in cities, the public realm provides the root system for human joy. And to illustrate the point, I'd like to get you to go back to Coolidge Park for a second and just think for a second. Maybe some of you here are not from Chattanooga, but I would assume that most of you are. Imagine what you think of when you think of Coolidge Park. Maybe you imagine, like my colleague, the very specific components, like the carved concrete sculptures that spout water, that give kids joy. Or maybe you think of the antique hand-carved animals that you can ride on in the carousel. Maybe you think a little bit more broadly and you imagine the Walnut Street Bridge being a part of Coolidge Park. And for those of you that don't know, the Walnut Street Bridge is our beloved linear walking path that crosses the river. Maybe you zoom out even a little further and you think of Coolidge Park as a part of a broader public space system of river parks that might even go all the way down to Moccasin Bend. Whatever it is that you imagined in your head, I would venture to guess that the person sitting next to you has a similar imagination, a similar image in their mind. So we all have a shared memory or a shared image of this space. And what that does for us is it creates a sense of belonging to that space, or rootedness. And there's that word, rooted. I'd like to explore it a little bit. If you're like me, when you heard the word root, you probably went straight to math. Like, the cube root of 27 is 3. My algebra days, like algebraic equations, like x squared minus 6x plus 5. The roots are 5 and 1. Maybe there's a few of you in here that don't deal in that language as much, and you can probably imagine maybe the roots of a plant or the roots of a tree. Then the last time you potted a plant, you can probably imagine those roots. Regardless of what kinds of roots we're talking about, I think that a root is a thing that you don't immediately see, that's underground or beneath the surface, whether figuratively or literally, that explains and or provides structure for the things that you do see. Roots are the invisible parts that make the visible possible. So as I got into architecture, as with a lot of things, the first thing that we see is that visible part. We don't necessarily see the invisible first. And for me, my initial attraction in architecture was for baseball. I had gone all the way through my life. I was a senior in college, and I had always wanted to be a Major League Baseball player. That I had reached the age of 22, and I hadn't actually played baseball since the 9th grade, suggested that I would probably need to come up with a different skill. So I wrote letters to all of the Major League Baseball teams and told them that I was a mathematician and that I could help them with their statistics. I might have been before my time, and that I could help them evaluate their players. None of that worked out, but around the same time, in the mid-90s, you may remember there was a boom in new stadium construction. Baseball stadiums like Oriole Park at Camden Yards, the ballpark at Arlington, Jacobs Field, even Turner Field in Atlanta were being built to resemble the nostalgic, traditional baseball parks of the past. And this started to make me think maybe there was a way for me to work in baseball through studying design. It wasn't until later that I would learn that there was something that I wasn't immediately seeing. It would explain those initial materials and the traditional detailing that was attracting me. Soon after I got out of architecture school, I discovered a book that was very influential to me called City Baseball Magic. It was a very thin book, but highly specific. And the basic premise of the book was, at the time in Chicago, they were replacing Comiskey Park. And the author of the book, who was an architecture professor at Notre Dame University, was proposing an alternative to what they were going to build at Comiskey Park. And he insisted that the new stadium be neighborhood friendly. He had details and specific diagrams in the book that would assure that the stadium was compact so that it could fit within the street grid. He also included in his book a critique of a lot of these stadiums that had come on board in the mid-90s, and that was surprising to me. And what I learned through the author was that how architecture looks might be one thing, but how it makes people behave and how they interact with each other. In the case of baseball, how they come to and go away from the stadium and how they interact with each other as a part of that event is what matters the most. Again, I started to learn an invisible part that was explaining the visible. I want to tell a story real quickly, another baseball story that would illustrate that point. In 2000, it was May of 2000, I visited a friend in Manhattan who was living there, and I was staying over the weekend all the way into the new week, and the ESPN Game of the Night, they televised nationally a baseball game every Sunday night, was the Yankees versus the Red Sox. For those of you that aren't baseball fans out here, you could argue the Yankees and the Red Sox might be the most historically rich rivalry in American professional sports. Not only that, but the pitchers that night were Roger Clemens for the Yankees, who actually came up with the Red Sox, and Pedro Martinez with the Red Sox. So a heated rivalry and two surefire Hall of Fame pitchers. The game was an instant classic. It has its own Wikipedia page. Clemens pitched a gem all the way through 8 innings, gave up 0 runs, struck out 12 batters. Martinez pitched a complete game, which means he pitched the entire game, didn't give up a single run, and the Red Sox were able to win when a relief pitcher came in for the Yankees, and Trot Nixon hit a 2-run homer. I remember the trip to the stadium equally as fondly as the game. My friend lived in Manhattan in one of those apartments that didn't have an elevator, and so we walked out his apartment and circled around to the stairwell and down and circled around and down. At one point, we saw one of his neighbors fiddling with his keys. We said hello. There were some jabs about the Yankees and the Sox. We went down into the street. We walked a couple of blocks to the subway. We went down into the subway. It was a normal Sunday afternoon at this point, 2 or 3 in the afternoon. And so it was a few people milling around, maybe 1 or 2 people with Yankee caps on. And the subway comes. If you've ever ridden the train from Manhattan to the Bronx, it's a long trip. It's a 30, 45-minute trip, as I recall, and 15, maybe 20 stops. But you could tell there was a rhythm as you got closer and closer to the Bronx. More and more people were boarding the subway, clearly going to the game. The last 2 or 3 stops, I don't know how many of you have been on a crowded subway, but you're standing as thin as you possibly can, and you're just holding on to the strap. And everybody in the train car is a Yankee fan. Yankee hats everywhere. We emerge at the last stop. The doors to the subway open up, and the mass of people flood out, and then you're waiting as people walk up the stairs, and you can hear it and smell it before you even get to the top of the street. And as we do get to the top of the street, you can see it all around. There's people holding up tickets. I've got 2 tickets for sale, and there's other people holding up numbers of the number of tickets that they need. There's people selling hot dogs and beer and souvenirs. The thing that I cherish the most about that memory, we didn't actually go to the game. We weren't able to get tickets. But the fact that I still revere that experience and cherish that experience because we interacted with so many people from Manhattan down the stairs of my friend's apartment, through the streets of Manhattan to the subway, got on the train. We had a shared experience with other Yankee fans in a strong public realm that was continuous from his apartment door all the way to the stadium. For a brief moment, and I wasn't trying to do this, if anything, I was rooting for the Red Sox, but for a brief moment, I was also a Yankee fan. I had a sense of belonging. And that came from the interactions of the people that I had, the interactions with the people, but it also came from the public realm that we had experienced. And so I'd like to come back to Chattanooga and talk a little bit about the public realm here. I grew up here, so I'll tell the story my way. We tell this story a lot in Chattanooga, but when I grew up here in the 70s and 80s, Chattanooga was not the kind of place that I thought I would move back to. It certainly wasn't the kind of place that would attract people from all over the country to come here and buy homes and live in Chattanooga as much as what has happened in the last decade or so. I believe that what Chattanooga did was strengthen its public realm around principles of being human-centered and people-oriented. We started with several principles. My mentor, Straub Watson, gave 2 that he repeated over and over and over again through the Chattanooga Design Studio for 20 years, that strong cities have to have clear hearts or centers. We established ours to be the intersection of Martin Luther King Boulevard and Market Street. Strong cities have to know where they came from. Why are they there? What is their origin? And engage with and celebrate that origin. For us, Chattanooga is a city, it is a civilization because of the Tennessee River, and specifically because of Ross's Landing. 40 years ago, you couldn't even see the river from downtown, and we worked over a number of years to reverse those trends. And then those design principles apply even more to a block and a neighborhood level. I can rattle them off pretty quickly. For example, we want our buildings to be proportional so that they present a sense of enclosure, so that our streets feel like outdoor rooms. We want all of our streets to have trees on them to provide shade for human comfort. Storefronts should have transparent glass so that to provide visual connection between people that are inside and people that are outside. In neighborhoods, houses should have front porches to create an intermediate space between the private realm of the living room and the public space of the neighborhood to encourage neighbor interaction. Streets should be designed for people and not for cars. And all of those principles are the things that I espouse in the work that I do as an architect and an urban designer and someone who works in the public sector. But the experience going to the Yankee game and so many more makes me recognize that it's not just about those things that we see initially, those things that we can touch that are static and that are physical. It doesn't really matter how great our public realm is if there's not people doing things that help give a sense of belonging. And so there's another part to that, and it means that you don't have to be an architect or an urban designer. You don't have to be an elected leader, you don't have to be a council person to have an impact on a sense of belonging in your community. I'd like you all to think for a minute, the last time you did something in public. Well, it wasn't a trick question. You're all here today, so this is the last thing you did in public. But before that, it doesn't have to be anything major. It could just be you walked your dog around the block, or you have a group of people that you have wine with on the weekends, or maybe you walked down to the bakery and bought a baguette. Maybe you went to a neighborhood meeting and spoke out in support of a project. Maybe you signed up for a marathon and ran in a marathon. Maybe you came here to the Memorial Auditorium to see a concert, or you went to a CFC game. It's those activities that strengthen a sense of belonging for our community. It's not just the urban design. And so I want you to imagine the next time that you're in public, if you decide to walk or ride a bike instead of drive a car, if you decide to take the bus, you decide to walk down to the cafe and have a bagel, or if you decide to go to a council meeting, recognize that you are strengthening the roots of belonging in your community. Because rootedness and belonging isn't just designed, it's practiced. Thank you.